Hi, and welcome to my FlossTube channel. I'm Jean Farish, and I am especially glad that you're here with me today. I think that this is number 24. Back in August when I kind of started into this whole thing, I had no idea where I was going with it, but you have been here with me, and I appreciate that so much. And in fact, this is the beginning of my 40th year as a professional cross-stitch designer and teacher. And so I am celebrating those 40 years, and I want to celebrate with you. I am going to have a giveaway every month. I'm not really sure what it's going to be. It's not going to be anything big, so like don't go cleaning out the garage for your second car, because it's not going to be a car. But it'll be something interesting and stitchy sort of. And I'm going to do it by just randomly drawing a name from a subscriber. So you don't need to comment anything here. All you need to do is be a subscriber. And I think somewhere there's probably a subscribe button. I am almost as new to YouTube and FlossTube as many of my viewers are. So I'm not really sure I can give you a tutorial on it. But after I am finished with all this, I will take a look and see how it's done. So that's what we're going to be doing. And so that's the first thing I wanted to share with you. The next thing is to bring you up to date on Jane Hattersley. Now, this is a sampler that you're going to see more of in this episode, because I'm going to take you through the steps that I use when I am framing a sampler, particularly the stage where you're mounting it on a piece of acid-free foam core. So that's coming up. But before I get into that, there's an important detail that I want to share with you. I've mentioned before that I want to do this for those who want to. We're going to do a stitch along, and we're going to start on April 9th, which coincides with the date that Jane either finished her sampler or her birth date. And at this point, I'm not certain which of those two dates, which of those two reasons she stitched April 9th on her sampler. But I'm hoping that long before April 9th, I will can do some effective research and shed a little bit of light on that. So mark your stitching calendar for April 9th and plan to join me with a stitch along for Jane Hattersley. Now, how you participate is totally up to you. I'm of course producing the chart as a chart pack or PDF, and I've invited local cross-stitch shops and a couple of good online resources to join us in this endeavor. And in my comments, I'm going to be listing all the shops that are going to be involved as they sign up week by week. Now, I just kind of let them know about this a couple of days ago, so the list right now is fairly short, but I do want to give a shout out to them. I don't want to mess up this list, so I'm going to sort of read it to you. It's kind of short, and I'll put the shop name as a subtitle as we're going along, or whatever you want to call it. And of course, I'll also list this in my comments on the channel page. So right now, this is kind of short. I didn't send out the email to shops until Wednesday, I think. So this list will be growing. Right now, we have Stitch Point on Friendly in Greensboro, North Carolina, Hobby House Needleworks up in Pittsford, New York, a stitching shop in Denver, Colorado, Tomorrow's Heirlooms in Glen Ellyn, Illinois, Needleworkers Delight up there in Metuchen, hope I'm saying that right, New Jersey, and online, the Farmer's Attic. So again, I'll have the details as far as if they have websites. I'll put the link in my comments, as well as the phone numbers for all these shops. Now, if I didn't list your favorite shop, one of the things that you can help yourself and will help me is call them up and say, hey, I really want to do this Jane Hattersley stitch along. Can you kit it up for me? Here's Jean's information. So that will be a win-win all the way around. So I'm not going to put any kits together for this endeavor. You can either kit it from your stash or buy a kit from one of the participating shops. If you want a PDF, you'll need to get that from my Etsy store. Now, it's not on there yet. I'll announce on a future FlossTube episode when it's ready for download. But we've got plenty of time. We're talking about April 9th to start with. But one of the important reasons to get in touch with your shop now, if you want to buy the supplies, is again, that whole supply chain thing and mailing of stuff, as we all know, has really slowed down here in the United States and probably elsewhere as well. So the more notice you can give that you want to participate, the better. And of course, they'll do their own kitting and their own pricing. Oh, and this, because I can talk, I really can. Because this sampler is all cross stitch and none of it is over 1, it can be done on Aida. So whether you love to stitch on linen or even weave or Aida, this sampler will be perfect for you. So that's the important thing as far as what I wanted to get the information out on the early part of this episode. The other topic I want to cover before I get into the nitty-gritty of prepping your needlework for framing is to talk a little bit about my own efforts with Peace on Earth. Now, I'm this far. I'm not quite done yet. My daughter Elizabeth has finished this design. Now, this is the second Christmas sampler in the round that I've done. The first one, of course, was Hearts Come Home at Christmas. So last week, one of the things I did was to present for you my New Year's wish for you. And that is that when you are doing a kind of show and tell, whether it's in person or in a social media setting, that you present your work and talk about what joy it brought you, what you liked about it, and to stop apologizing for it. And no sooner did I do that than the next day when I sat down to stitch, I realized I had made a major stitching error. I misplaced the letter E and made it taller than it should have been, which meant the rest of that line, the piece on that whole line, was wrong. And I didn't discover it until I was ready to stitch that little pink tree over on the right-hand side. And it wasn't lining up the way I expected it to. So, of course, that meant I went back to see where my mistake was. Now, I'll be honest with you, it took my daughter and I 15 minutes looking at this for me to find out where my mistake was. And then when I looked at the next line, the lowercase letters were right in terms of their size, but the capital letter E was 1 stitch too tall. So again, I share this with you, not apologizing for my work at all, but just to tell you that even we professionals make these very common stitching mistakes. And the best way to prevent them is to count twice and stitch once, and as much as possible to use 2 or 3 points on the piece to compare where you are and where you should be and kind of line it up. And if all 3 of them are check, 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 that's where it should be, then you're probably good to go. But very often you don't find that you've made a stitching mistake until you've gone well beyond it. So I just wanted to share that little experience with you. Footnote to that. One of the things too that I tell people when they have to rip something out is give it what I call the Band-Aid treatment. And I don't mean putting the Band-Aid on, but that old ripping it off. Band-Aids have improved. They're not quite as painful to remove now as they were when my generation were kids. But so when I go to rip something out, I just do it. And I don't mean I'm careless about it or that I'm, doing it so fast. But once I've decided that it has to go, I just sit down and do it. So I put on, we were watching Bridgerton, and we were really enjoying it. And I just rolled over from one episode to another and just kept watching it until I finished ripping this out. And the time went fairly quickly that way. In planning this episode, I realized that there's some technical things that I need to work through with camera angles and whatnot in order to present the best viewpoint to you. And so I'm just going to ask you to bear with me a little bit while I work through some of this. So far, I've been more focused on the close-ups than trying to give you a broader view of something that I'm doing. So just, I might stumble a little bit, but we'll get through it. Okay, so the first thing let's talk about, and that's supplies. When you are going to mount your work for needlework, you do need to make sure that you use acid-free foam core. Now, there are a lot of different types of foam core. It is not all acid-free. And then there are even some other types that are, for example, might be better for mounting a photograph or a lithograph or whatever. So what I'm talking about specifically is for needlework. The second thing is, what I'm going to show you is how I prepare my work for framing is by pinning rather than by lacing. Now, many people pin their needlework in preparation for lacing. So if you want to take that step, then what I'm going to show you will be helpful. But I will tell you that once I have it pinned to the acid-free foam core, I'm done. I don't lace it. So that's one thing to share with you. So you also need, the pins that I use are actually Sequin pins, and I like them because they're shorter than your typical straight pin, and therefore easier to push into the foam core. A lot of people talk about the need for them to be stainless steel. What I have found is it's not so much they need to be stainless steel, is that they need to be nickel plated to prevent any sort of rusting over time. So that's what I have, are nickel plated sequin pins and a piece of acid-free foam core. Now, the acid-free foam core comes in different thicknesses. What I'm using is the thicker of the two that people use for needlework, and I need to find out exactly how thick that is and add that as a little subtitle on this. So those are the only two things that I also use a ruler. So the acid-free foam core and sequin pins and a ruler. And you really do need to make sure that you have a good ruler. There are all kinds of cute souvenir type rulers out there, but they are not always as accurate as something like this one that is made for people who do drafting and whatnot. Not that you have to have a draftsman's ruler, but you need a good ruler. Okay, so that's what I do in terms of equipment. Now, the steps that I take. The first thing you need to do is really look at your needlework. And what I have discovered from my experiences on social media is sometimes the best way to look at it is to take a photograph and then look at the photograph by blowing it up and really looking at it carefully, because that's where I've sometimes found my mistakes. So you want to look at it carefully to make sure that you are finished, for one thing. I mean, there are people that have, stitched the sampler and then they say, oh my gosh, it was supposed to be a little crown in that area, and I meant to go back and do it, and I forgot about it. So look over it and make sure it's complete. Make sure you don't have any loose threads on the front and also on the back. Now, my daughter stitched this, so I will be, I'm going to look at this objectively with her stitching here. I would say that Elizabeth did a really good job with not having wandering threads or having anything that needs to be trimmed. But should you have any threads that you meant to cut closer, then this would be a good time to do it. Okay, so that's one thing. And then, of course, to also look carefully at the front. And when I did, that's when I discovered something here that I have frankly never come across. And this appears to be, let me come in closer here. Yeah, here we are. I hope you can see. This appears to be a slub that's actually come loose, and it looks like a piece of fuzz sitting on top of my fabric, but it's actually attached to it. So I'm going to do a little bit of surgery on this before I start mounting it, because obviously if I'm going to do anything with it, now's the time. Now, I looked at this and I thought about cutting it off, but one of the things with a slub is that it's actually part of the weave. It's integrated in the weave, and so cutting it off is not always the safest thing. You may end up with a hole in your linen. So I'm going to thread a needle and catch this and pull it through to the back. That's my plan. So let's see if I can actually do that. As I said, I've never come across anything like this before, so I've also never had to fix anything like this before. So this is going to be an experiment. Hopefully the first thing I'm going to try is going to work. Okay, so the first thing I have to figure out is whether this is a vertical or a horizontal thread. And I'm going to get rid of some of the excess. I think I'm also going to go ahead and dampen this with a sponge. To try to thin it out a little bit. So now that I've determined that it's a horizontal thread that's created the tuft, I'm going to put my needle in the hole where I believe it should go and catch the slub on the loop and pull it through. Just like that. Okay, that was pretty easy. So now I don't have that tuft on the front anymore. I also noticed a smaller one right here. So I'm going to do the same thing. Actually, this one, I feel like I can cut off. Okay. So again, the thing that you want to be careful about when you're dealing with slubs is that they are not necessarily extra thread in the linen weave. They are a thicker thread in the linen weave. And so the idea of just cutting them out, you could end up cutting that thread and then ending up with a hole. So that's why you need to be particularly careful. So I'm pretty pleased with how simple that was to fix. So assuming you don't have anything like that, once you've looked at the back, once you know that it's done and you've looked at the back, then you're pretty much ready for framing. So that I would be able to make this episode video all at one time, I've already had my foam board cut by my local framer, and I really work with them as sort of a team. I rely on their expertise and their inventory and their skill to be able to do things for me more efficiently and frankly better than I would be able to do them myself. But one of the ways where we work as a team is in terms of deciding how big the foam board needs to be cut. When you look carefully at the way a frame is constructed, there's a little groove on the back where the foam board sits. And so keep in mind that about 1/4 of an inch all the way around of your work is going to be hidden so that it's, under that lip. So my framer's name is Jill, and in working with Jill, we first had to decide how much linen fabric I wanted to show outside the edge of the work. And I decided on 3/4 of an inch. So we actually added about 1 inch all the way around to account for what's going to get hidden under the lip. So one of the ways we work as a team is physically deciding not just how, what that dimension is going to be in terms of that I wanted it to be 1 inch, but also figuring out what that translates into in terms of the size to cut. That's not making a lot of sense. I think I just need to show you. So I need to pull this camera away to get a broader shot here. So when I say that I work with my framer in teamwork, it's not just in terms of advice and skills, but also just working together. So in trying to decide how big to cut the foam board, the first thing we had to decide is how big is this design actually. So picking an area where the stitching is fairly dense, I pulled it out to show Jill how tightly I planned on mounting the fabric. Now that's completely relaxed, that's taut, this is tight. So you can see that there is a range, and it's very possible to try to mount your knit linen too tightly. So you don't want it loose, you don't want it tight, you want it taut in the middle. So we did that for the width, and then we did the same thing for the length. So this is the densest area, so that's where I pulled it to give her an idea of how tightly I planned to pull this. She took that measurement, and then in both cases for the width and the length, we added 2 inches so that I would have an extra inch all the way around for the linen to show. Actually, 3/4 of an inch is going to show, 1/4 of an inch is going to be under the lip of the frame. Now, in preparation for going to the framer, I did wash and iron this so that it would present the best and be easiest to measure it, and also to be able to choose a frame. By the time I get ready to mount this, I will have handled it enough that I will feel like it will probably need a little bit of a pressing before I actually do the pinning. Because the next thing I'm going to do is going to be to baste a line all the way around the 4 sides. That's going to correspond to exactly where this is going to be wrapping around the edge of the foam core. Now that might seem like a lot of work and a lot of extra work, but it will really save me time in the long run. It will allow me to get this exactly lined up on my foam board. I did think of one more thing before I go upstairs to put my feet up and stitch to show you, and that is preparing my foam core. Now this is a step that I've only recently started doing, and I really got tuned into this when I was framing white work, because what I discovered was if I put my beautiful open lacy white work onto white foam core, then I couldn't see the laciness of the stitches as well than if I put it on a very, very pale blush or tan background. So I want to see if I can demonstrate what I'm talking about here using this piece, because I am going to alter the color of my foam board. Putting this tan linen onto white foam board, I don't think is going to present it at its best. So let me see if I can show you. Frankly, I'm not sure if this is going to show up. Okay, so I've laid the linen on the white foam board, and you can kind of see if I can change my lighting here a little bit. You can see against the black background, you can see where the foam board is underneath this. Now, if I put a piece of tan fabric over the white foam board like this, I'll lay it right here so you can see the contrast. Then when I put the linen on the tan part, the color to me is richer because the linen fabric is just open enough that the background is showing up between the linen threads. No matter how I try to photograph this, I don't think I can get quite the message across that I want to. So what I would encourage you to do is just play with it. Now, in my case, I'm going to cover my foam board with fabric. But you can also do the same thing with a piece of mat board or a piece of acid-free paper. You still want the foam board because it's easy to push the pins into it. Mat board is just too dense. But let me also show you, I thought about using this very, very brown color. This is actually darker than my linen. And it actually makes it, to me, too dark. So I'm not gonna use this really dark one. I'm gonna use the lighter tan behind it. So I wanted to show you this before I took this upstairs to do the stitching, because while I'm up there, I'm going to go ahead and iron this one last time. And when I come back, I'll be ready to actually pin it, which is what you've been waiting for like the last half hour. Let me just say from the outset that rarely have I pinned something one time around. Very often I'll get a side pinned, and then when I go to pin the other side, I'll realize that it's not quite the way it should be. So don't be concerned if that happens to you, because it'll be a big surprise to me if I don't have to do or redo something a couple of times here. So what I have here is I've ironed my piece for the last time, and I have it laying on the foam core, and I have, again, the foam board is now covered with my tan fabric. And okay, so to show you the back, I've simply taped it. I've just, put it on there and just taped the back. So that's what my foam board is now. What I'm going to do first is sort of line it up to see that the corners are where I've got my stitching is lining up with the corner of the foam board, and then check with the other corner as well. Remember again that this is just slightly a rectangle, so I have to be very careful that I'm not accidentally turning it 90 degrees and pinning it in the wrong direction. Now, because I have done this basting around the perimeter, I can pretty much start in the corner and work across, and then just keep checking to make sure that I'm not pulling it too tightly, that my other corner is going to match up. A lot of directions talk about starting in the middle and working toward the corner, and I have done it that way as well. But once I started doing this perimeter basting, I found that I can work more efficiently just going from corner to corner. So let me see if I can get a close-up here to show you how I get started. And which reminds me, oh, I've got 2 sets of glasses on here. I just need to put my close-up glasses on. And what I'm going to do is simply pin this around the corner. Got a little supply of pins here. And push my pin in, not all the way in. Let me do this a little bit more close up. And again, I'm folding this so that my basted line is right on the edge of my foam board. Now right now I'm putting these pins maybe a ½ inch apart from each other. I'll go back and fill in once I have just kind of the rough pinning in place. Now you can't see it on the camera, but every once in a while I'm reaching over here to the other corner and making sure that I'm not pulling this too far this way. I want to get my fabric tension just right. And in my effort to put this on in a camera so that you can see it. I'm kind of working a little bit at odds. I would normally be working on the side that's closest to me, but this is turning out okay. I just want to make sure that you can see what I'm doing. So my corner over here is lined up just right. Now, one of the reasons I don't put a lot of pins in to start with is just in case I do need to remove them and repin them. So now I have pinned across the top of the piece. And now I'm going to turn this and I'm going to pin across the bottom. Again, starting in a corner. And I'm finding I need to put just a little bit of tension on my fabric here. I think you can see, if I just laid this around here, you can see that there's about 1/4 inch between the edge of the board and my basting. So I am having to tug at this just a little bit. So again, I'm at the corner, and you can see that I'm in just the right place to pin this. So that does a very loose pinning of the top and the bottom. And so now I'm going to do the same thing on the side. I dropped this supply of pins the other day and used a magnetic pin keep to pick them all up and left it on there, and so they have now magnetized to each other, and they're proving to be a little bit more difficult to handle because they keep sticking to each other. Okay, so now 3 sides are done with the very rough pinning. And now over here on the 4th side, again, I'm going to have to tug at this one a little bit more than the opposite side. Those of you who have pets can see that obviously when I spilled the pins and picked them up, I picked up a few dog hairs as well. Now I have to tell you, I am pretty much pleased with my preliminary pinning. Now I'm going to get into some really finer, more detailed pinning. And in order to do that, I'm going to change the camera angle a little bit and hold this more in my lap like this. And so let me get the close-up camera set up here so that you can see. So now I think it's clear that you can see where my basting thread is right on the edge of the foam board. And so I'm going to pull this from the back a little bit and get my stitches nicely lined up. And now I'm going to put in a lot more pins. Put in a couple of pins between the ones that I already have in place. And just work all the way across like this. So now I have the pins done all the way across the bottom of the piece, and now I'm going to do the top and the other 2 sides the same way. If this were a typical piece of needlework at this point, I would be pretty much done. What makes this not typical is not only does it have a border, but it's a straight line border. So any slight irregularity in the tension and the way I have pinned my linen is going to make that straight line a wavy line, which is not acceptable. So I'm going to show you what I now do to do the final tweaking to make sure that my border is nice and straight, or as straight as I can possibly make it. So you can see, particularly along here, that it's a little wiggly. And what I need to do is to pull this in to straighten that line out. Now, to help me, I'm going to go ahead and put a straight edge along here so that I can really see where it needs to be fixed. And I'm just going to, just eyeball it a little bit. And sometimes it's a matter of taking a pin out and readjusting it. And sometimes it's a matter of adding pins to get it nice and straight. And sometimes it's too tight, and so you need to take a pin out and maybe loosen the tension a little bit to straighten it. So this is one of the reasons I don't push the pins in all the way until I've done this stage. So now I'm going to go around all 4 sides and check and see if anything else needs to be adjusted. So now I am pretty much happy with the way it looks. And a lot of times, if I have time, I will just let it lie at this point and walk away from it and do something else for a couple of hours and come back and see if I still feel like it passes inspection. So, but what I want to do right now, though, is to show you my last little couple things that I do. Now, of course, I still have the pins sticking up all over the place. So the first thing I do is to simply push it down on a flat surface like this. And that allows me to get the pins about, 95% of them are pushed in. And then I take a regular spoon and I quite literally use the spoon and just push the pins in like this. There's probably a better tool, but I find that this is handy and it works. So I will do that all the way around all 4 sides and make sure that the pins are pushed in and are flush. So what's left to do at this point? Just a couple of little things. For one thing, I want to make sure that these threads that I use for basting are not going to be in the way. So I'm going to clip off any that seem to be sticking out. You may be wondering if I'm going to remove the basting, and my answer to that is no, I'm not. Mainly because at times I have tried taking them out, and in fact I'll just do this. This is a short one, so I'll take this one out. And every once in a while I have found that it has pulled the linen thread. So I pretty much just leave it in place. Again, I might take these little short ones out, but it's not gonna show. It's gonna be covered by the frame. So that's okay. So that's one thing that I do. Oh wait, here's another one. And then on the back, I'm going to tape down my excess fabric, and I'm using some acid-free artist tape to do that. Let me just show you how I do the corners. Now, of course, this other tape that's on here is from when I taped down my sort of underlining fabric. So I just try to make the corners neat, just to make it easy for my framer to do her thing. So I want to get this excess down. Now sometimes I will actually sew along this edge and along this edge, but I don't really think I need to do that. Well, this is not tidy enough, so let me go back here. This is purely, I think that this is more cosmetic than functional. I guess it's just a point of pride to be able to bring this back to my framer so it's nice and neat. So that's what I'm going to do on all four corners and all four sides. And the next thing is going to be to put it in the frame. At this point, I don't usually have the frame already at home. I usually take it back to my framer and she pops it into the frame for me, and then I do my photography and all that kind of stuff. But because I'm in a little bit of a time crunch here, she made the frame for me already. So I get to show you at least an idea of what it's going to look like. So this is what I picked for this particular piece. And so my next step will be to take this back over to Jill, and she will add, I'm going to have art glass put on this, which is just incredible glass. It has UVA protection, etc., etc. It's very archival, but you can't even tell that there's glass on it. It's absolutely incredible. It's pricey. There's no doubt about that. But this is a particularly important piece to me. Elizabeth stitched it, and it's gorgeous, and it's going to be an heirloom. So for me, it's worth that extra cost. So what needs to be done now is Jill will add a spacer, because you don't want your glass to be in contact with the needlework. If I were using a mat, I wouldn't need a spacer. So what that spacer does is just, lifts it up off the needlework. So she'll have a spacer, art glass, she'll put the dust cover on the back and add wire, and then it will become just an incredible addition to our household. And I really think that we did Jane proud. And I hope that come April that you're going to be part of our stitch along, because I think it's going to be fun. And I'll talk a little bit more about that next week, and hopefully have more shops that I can add to the list. And again, if you have a favorite shop or an online presence that you particularly care for, let me know, or better yet, let them know that you would very much like to be a part of our stitch along, and you need a source. So that way, it's like a three-legged stool. We've got you, the stitcher, we've got me, the designer, and we've got the place where you can get your linen and your threads and your chart all together. So that's about that. So that's pretty much a wrap. That's probably, I don't know, when I get all done editing this, I think this is going to be one of the longer episodes, but I have really enjoyed it. I love saving money, and I find that by doing the mounting myself, that it shaves a few cents off the whole total price of having custom framing done. And as I have said, and I hope that today's episode shows you that if you have the skills to do this type of needlework, you have the necessary skills to do the mounting yourself. So, let me know how you feel about that, and I would love to hear your success stories, especially. So, all right. So between now and next week, I hope that you stitch happy and stay safe. I'll see you then.